We can see a question already. We've got a few minutes for questions. If you could introduce yourself when you ask the question, and then we'll get the panel to answer.
So I'm Richard Sever from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. I think as publishers, it's important that when we set policies, we distinguish between raw data, process data, and source data. So by source data, I mean the data behind the figures that you put in a paper. And we have to be realistic about the possibilities for archiving those three different types of data. I mean, just as an example, at Cold Spring Harbor, where I work, there are the reaction to the POS policy among neuroscientists was essentially outcry. One guy said to me, he said, look, I have hundreds of hours of video footage. From that video footage, I create tables of data. Now, I will give you those tables of data, my Excel files, but are you seriously suggesting that you want the hundreds of hours of video footage? That's my data. Similarly, in genome sequencing, the raw reads, we bought maybe a gigabyte, but you can be talking about terabytes or petabytes of that information. And just sort of anecdotally, that community has decided that they actually throw away all that data because there's too much to store. And the best way to store that type of data is actually in DNA itself, and to do the resequencing. So it seems to me from the I forbid Laurie from asking this question because I know she's just going to say, I want it all. but for the rest of us, I think, the answer will be different in different cases. But I think when we, as publishers, set up policies, we want to be very clear what we mean by data, because those are three very different things.
Since he's not the boss of me, can I respond?
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest you go first.
Is this on? Yeah. Actually, I completely agree with your point because, one, you're right, in terms of there are very different types of data. So it does take some consideration on the part of the editors, or if you have, for example, we have a biocurator. What, with that article, is necessary to reproduce that work? Or what in that data can we envision someone reusing? So with the single reads, like you're talking about, there is the SRA. For us, we host single reads in situations where someone did a paper on genome assembly. Because if you are going to redo that paper, you use the single reads to redo that paper. But otherwise, we don't host all the single reads. We put that. So we look at it very specifically from the standpoint of what is necessary to reproduce the work, and also what do we see that could be of value. So if those 6 billion videos or whatever really would be this immense archive of amazing, stuff that other people could use, yeah, maybe we can't do it now, but let's think about how can we.
Can I come up on this? I fully agree with what Laura is saying, and actually, specific for scientific data, we are working with the community because, as you said, different community have different minimum reporting requirement, what they believe it's important for their reuse. So absolutely, this is not a decision that a publisher should make, but should be done with the community, because these are the people who create the data and reuse the data. They will know the minimum requirements, and endorsing specific community, you mentioned SRA several times, which is the sequence database for the NCBI with the correspondent DNA and DPI. They exactly will tell the submitter what they want, what they don't want. So by automatically endorsing those community repository, which is a community repository because it means the community believes that's reusable data, you automatically can refine your data policy. Of course, there are data types for which there is no community repository, there are no minimum requirements, but that's actually where there is an active, movement for reproducible research. Will come. Exactly. I pass the microphone there.
I agree with you too. On a number of those points, and I think we're struggling with the same thing. It's the stuff in the middle. How do we constrain that? I'll just comment on when you were talking about the really raw data, whatever that looks like. If it's hundreds of hours of video footage, or in the case of astronomy, sort of this coming generation of telescopes. Absurd amounts of raw data coming off the back of the detectors, so that if you want to extend that, the exponential rise end of that, it's just going to go crazy. The amount of data that we get off an interferometer in Chile is just nuts. You can't keep it. It's too big, and it's not high value at some level for curation. But defining well which kinds of data are intellectually interesting enough, right, to maintain with value over time is crucial. And we're again in the context of the continuum, using that abstraction or that power law as an abstraction. For us, it's the stuff from the society's point of view, not the society's the publishing operation, but from the society's service to the community. It's the stuff in the middle that right now is sort of getting lost. Does that support what you're thinking? Yeah.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Does anyone have a burning issue they wish to raise?
There was some confusion when the PLOS data policy was first announced, but it's very clear it's only about the data underlying the paper. Everything else is crazy. I have a brief comment.
Sorry, we have more time.
From MicroCT paper that you mentioned, which is about tracking reuse. And just to highlight, there are challenges in that. One of them is, if people talk about this, are they linking to the paper or to the data set? For example, with the PLOS paper, we know there are quite a number of tweets that Facebook likes, but they go to PLOS, not to GigaDB. Another challenge is it's a data site DOI you're using, so all the tools we use for citation tracking don't work because it's not a crossword DOI. The question for you is that this is, I think, 30 gigabytes of data, and where's the middle ground for not the researcher working on this for months and not somebody who wants to spend 5 minutes and just sees a little picture on the article to make this viewable? So these CT scans, are there tools or services where you can download this without spending 10 hours and look at these CTs, for example?
Actually, yeah, and there's only so much you can talk about in 10 minutes. First of all, a lot of that data is also connected to a community repository that I can't remember the name. I mean, Susanna is right. You want to connect with community repositories. One of the things about the internet is there's a lot of information, but cross-linking, like you're saying, is really important. And so when we host data, all of the information, other papers, it's clicked through there, places in community repositories where they have the tools are there. Also, at GigaScience right now, because we have a Galaxy platform, we're also building in new tool systems. China has a whole bunch of supercomputers that they built to compete, but nobody uses. So they want us to use it, and we're doing trials with Amazon and Google this year with cloud computing, because what you're talking about is exactly how do we make this information available, this middle ground stuff. But the first thing is using community resources and tools and linking that. The tracking back and forth between papers, I think that is a tricky issue, but I think it's solvable and it's something we need to focus on. And the cross-linking and things like that, the stuff that Dataverse is doing and Dryad is doing also help with that.
Okay, yeah, we do actually have half an hour left. Sorry, I misread the program in the front there.
Hi, David Smith from the IET. I guess I've got a question. One of the things I'd really like to understand about all of this stuff is actually to get some kind of sense of what the researchers are actually doing with their raw data on a living daily basis. Because I see a load of the stuff that's being done here seems to happen very much seemingly towards the end of a whole rich range of complicated processes that are conversations with competitors or collaborators or whatever it is. And I just don't feel that I personally have got any understanding of what's actually happening in that area. And if we're trying to build this,
just thrown away.
Well,
they don't have enough. Right. Nobody has enough room for it.
And your point about the reaction to the PLOS statement, which is one of those just unfortunate things that happens when good intentions lead to PR, frankly, right? Is that the reaction to that speaks volumes, I think, about what's actually going on in the research community, and it's something we don't understand, or at least personally speaking, I don't feel I understand it at all well as someone who's involved in the publishing side of it.
It's also, of course, and the other thing, I mean, just to be fair,
There might be a question here in a moment, I don't know.
one of the reactions there was not directed at PLOS, it was directed more specifically at the genomics community, and neuroscientists were saying, just because you have lots of sequences, letters and numbers, we don't have that. We have much more kind of multi-parameter, multifactorial sets that are huge, and the lessons that you learn with NCBI's GenBank don't necessarily apply. So that's another, there's a triangle there.
So I hear a question there, whether you intended it or not. So here's one of those places where I think, like many things in this space, it's useful to think about things that we've absorbed in our culture of publishing traditional narrative things that are so part of us that we don't even notice them. So it would be as if you asked or expected researchers to publish all their draft manuscripts and the meeting notes from their lab meetings and all of the discussions in the hallway that went into the paper. And of course, they can't do that. It's mad. And all of those discussions, and sometimes they had them at the coffee shop and we were taking notes, right? Yet, at the end of the day, they have digested that, taken the essence of it, and produced something that they think they believe and they're willing to stand behind and they wish to share with their collaborators. And I think what many of us are working toward is a culture in which data are seen in the same light and treated in the same way as the narrative output is seen. So,
and I think just to make one point about, so yesterday we had the slide that went up about Piketty and the book on capital. And of course he's made his stuff available, right? And he appears to be now been the victim of what we can probably describe as a hatchet job by The Economist. Right, you cherry-picked a bunch of stuff that's out there, and I suspect a lot of the visceral reaction is, if you put a paper out there, you want to stand behind the paper. You don't want to get down in the mud with someone wading in to your 16 gigabytes of video data and going, well, actually, you didn't do that. There's got to be some filtration at an appropriate point in time there, and I think there's a lot of resistance to that.
Just a quick note that in several talks from yesterday, from a workshop yesterday, we were talking about that sometimes even if you think what is that you would reuse after a year or two of your data, right? That's one way of measuring what is that you want to make accessible to others. And maybe starting by that, I think it's important that we don't get lost into what would you do with everything else there that is not unclear, and start at least doing the right thing with the things that we know what to do about, and then maybe at some point there is enough space in or cloud or collaborations with
Cloud
Amazon.
makes it accessible to use.
That maybe we make even more and more available. But there is a typical pyramid, right, that shows the raw data at the bottom and at the end the article. And I think that if we get most of the middle accessible and we make that raw data part smaller than it is now, that it's an accessible part of smaller, we've made some progress.
and don't let fear of the edge cases or the gray areas stop you from doing what is fairly easy for most data most of the time.
Okay. We have another question here in the middle. Yes. Yeah.
Anita Elsevier. As I understand it, data science is about doing new science with old data or somebody else's data. I was wondering if the panel had thought about, so I think there's a contradiction between doing that and then the model of publishing a paper with its data. If the paper is about other people's data or other data out there somewhere, I was wondering if the panel had thought at all about, in this era of data science, how do you publish the data that's going into the data science paper? Is that a network of citations to other data points? Should a new data set be generated? How do you cite that? How does the data science paper work? And how is its data stored?
I mean, effectively, much like you don't pull papers that you cite all into some sort of collation and put them somewhere so everybody can get access to the within your paper. You don't have built into that all the papers you've cited. If you are using other people's data that's publicly available, you cite it. If you've cited it, then from that you can collate what the person reading it can actually directly track down that data. You don't have to rebuild a whole new data set. So if the data is already available, if you can cite it, you don't have to host that again. Is that what you're asking?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just asking for models.
Right. So effectively, it should be much like when you publish, when you cite other articles, and it makes it available. You would also cite data, and people can track that. So, but the data, if it's not available, nobody's going to reuse it anyway. So you won't run into that problem where we have to now host data, from somewhere else. So you can only use data that's already out there that people can point to.
So Michael Whitlock, who was instrumental in formulating and promulgating this sort of joint data archiving policy, which was kind of a precursor to DRIAD existing, and a number of ecology evolution journals changed their data policies to require archiving rather than sharing upon request in a coordinated fashion, and DRIAD responded to that policy. He has a very nice way of thinking of this in terms of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to breathe before you can do higher level activities, and you have to capture the data before you can do higher level activities such as data science. So from our perspective, what we're enabling isn't data science; it's science, right? It should be just that kind of communication of your data should be part of regular science, and if that is done sufficiently well, then resources can live upon that publication stream of data and select the data that's relevant and integrate it and quality control it and further curate it into resources that are spanning multiple narrative publications.
And so I suppose my question is that entire process that you just described, how do you store or cite or refer to that thing, that unification of disparate data sources and things you do? Is that in itself not perhaps a new data object?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how do you describe that, and does that work along here?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think there's still room for improvement. So yeah, I think there are solutions like Laura was saying on that. There's still also it could be enhanced by having a framework that tracks the provenance of how those data sets are combined, reused, extended. So we have still things that we can do to make that better.
I mean, to touch on that, I mean, effectively what you're talking about is granularity. How many citations do we have to use if we've used data from all over the place? So when you're putting something all together in this type of repository, if we build in those types of things, that's something that we could look toward to the future, and some places have already started it, to say, okay, in this collation, this article starts to use all of this, let's build on DRIAD or other repositories, these sharing things that still point to who generated that data. And so, I mean, with our 3,000 rice strains, we have one global DOI. So if someone does use all 3,000, they can cite that. But every single strain also has an individual DOI. So it's parent and child. So if you just use one, you can cite that. Or you can cite a series, they're numerical, this to this. So I could envision if you start to have these repositories, we should work on that, that would really take care of, some of the things you're talking about.
Susanna?
Another related example, that's great because it's about granularity. An example in my area in biology, for example, system biology model, it's a data set per se, which has been created or validated using existing experimental data or observational data. Now, to make it, in order to publish the model, and there are databases where you publish a model, I believe you have to make transparent where this, how this has been created. Therefore, you have to have a link to the original data set, which has to be available. And in the first instance, if it's not available, these people would have never even be able to create the model. So the connection is there. Yeah, I agree.
Any more comments on this question, or should we move to a new one at the back there, and then I'll continue?
Where you mentioned that collaboration should complement
Okay, I hopefully heard you. I'm sorry, I'm slightly deaf.
Repeat it.
Yeah, my understanding of the question is you're asking, is data citation alone enough of an incentive to allow people to push their data out and be willing to collaborate? Right. So a lot of this relies on, currently people rely on people citing their regular narrative manuscripts, and that means that they, are willing to share the information of what they provided. The reason they do that is, one, they want everybody to know, hey, I did this, and that's a personal thing. But also, that's how you get funding. So that's why being able to track citations, being able to track data use is really important, because if you can, not only you're getting credit, hey, look at this huge resource I'm providing the community, but also funders are saying, we funded this resource, and look how many people are using it. And I think that adds incentive. And a lot of times, it's not really, you didn't really get funding because you published all these papers. You got funding because you published this one thing that community is interested in. But a lot of times, people believe this idea of, if I track everything, I'll get more funding. And, yes and no. But I think engaging funders is really another important step. And funding agencies are already really pushing in this direction.
The session actually closes at 12:15, so we got the technology right now, we've got the timing right, so I think we can take one very quick last statement, and then if any of the speakers can hold on afterwards, because there's clearly quite a lot of discussion still that people are keen to have, I'm sure we can continue informally in some way.
Just following on with that, I wonder what somebody mentioned it, but nobody really talked about it in detail, was the notion of embargoes. And one junior faculty member I spoke to said, I don't mind giving out my data, but, can you just give me like a run at it so I can look if everything I can get out of it, because I'm an early career scientist, and then everybody else can have it.
I'm only going to comment on this because we have an example that from BGI that's directly related to this point. 2 years ago, BGI released polar bear data with the DOI 2 years ago that they had not published the analysis paper on. People have used that data and cited it at least, I know of 5 times. 2 weeks ago, they finally published the analysis paper in Cell. So, yes, it's scary, but it's probably not true. It may happen, but the other thing is there are community agreements of don't use my data in a whole analysis until I've had an opportunity to publish it. And one of the things I think with data citation and references is it makes it a hell of a lot easier for an editor to go, God, this was just released last week. This person shouldn't be doing this. I mean, to be fair, let's give the people who made it time. So those types of policies can be worked into it. And I think the publisher has to support the researcher and say, I'm going to help protect you for being a good citizen.
But that's basically a research policy question, not so much not a publishing policy question. They're related, but that one's really a
Okay, so I think at that point, unfortunately, we have to stop. Just a reminder, there is a roundtable to continue this discussion over lunch tomorrow. It's in the program, so feel free to come and join us, or if anyone wants to stay on, ask anything else, please do. Thank you very much.
Susanna can speak for Big Science.